The RNC is gearing up to actually address concerns about the election itself, which are rampant in conservative circles, in conservative movement circles, in conservative supporter circles, conservative donor circles. So you can understand why the RNC is then going to try to make this a focus of its sort of campaign on the ground in the next several months. But Krystal, oh my goodness, a lot of people know probably that Trump's daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, who is married to Eric Trump, is now a co-chair of the RNC after the sort of soft coup that ousted Ronna McDaniel, who then faced another soft coup at NBC News. This woman just can't get away from the revolutionaries in the Republican Party. But Laura Trump is now a co-chair of the RNC, which is obviously the Republican Party's official apparatus here in Washington, D.C. She sat down for an interview with Garrett Haake of NBC News, and they had a conversation about basically the way they're going to handle the question of the 2020 election, which is huge because it affects the way they're going to handle the 2024 election. It affects the way voters decide whether or not to even go to the polls, whether or not to, how to think about election results. So let's first start by just rolling the clip, and we'll dive into it after that.
Is it going to be the position of the RNC in 2024 that the 2020 election was not fairly decided or that it was stolen somehow?
Well, I think we're past that. I think that's in the past. We learned a lot. Certainly, we took a lot of notes. Right now, we have 23 states that have 78 lawsuits in these states to ensure that it is harder to cheat and easier to vote. We want fairness and transparency in our elections.
Does that support for him financially include paying his legal bills directly?
Not from the RNC. It does not support paying his legal bills.
How do you tell people who are sending money to the RNC, people who may have never hired a lawyer for themselves before in their life, that it's more important to put their money towards paying the legal bills of a billionaire than helping elect Republicans in Pennsylvania or in Michigan?
Well, if you've never had to hire a lawyer, you're doing great stuff. You're in great shape. I'm very happy for you. Look, that is the waterfall of the joint fundraising committee you're referencing. Mm-hmm. And anyone who does not want to contribute to that very small amount of money is able to opt out of that.
So I think he expected her to give a different answer to the question about whether the RNC is going to pay Donald Trump's legal bills, because then he tried to say, well, what do you say to RNC donors who are giving money to pay Trump's legal bills, when she had just said that's through the joint fundraising committee. Now, obviously money is fungible, and people are telling donors where to put their money to do X, Y, and Z. So that's still obviously part of the conversation. But, Krystal, I was prepared based on the media coverage of that interview. She stumbles especially a little bit in the beginning where she's like, that's in the past, it's in the past, and kind of didn't know where to go from there. Mm-hmm. But it's a really, really hard question. I mean, I thought if you were just watching that and not looking at a transcript, she came out fine, but that question, Republicans still don't have a really, really good answer for it, which brings us to this tear sheet we can put up. This is B2 from the Washington Post. Those seeking employment at the RNC after a Trump-backed purge of the committee this month have been asked in job interviews if they believe the 2020 election was stolen, according to people familiar with the interviews, making the false claim a litmus test of sorts for hiring. In recent days, Trump advisors have quizzed multiple employees who had worked in key 2024 states and who are reapplying for jobs about their views on the last presidential election, according to people who spoke on the condition of anonymity. Mm-hmm. So that's from the Washington Post. That is why the RNC is in an incredible pickle. So a lot of people lost their jobs but were invited to reapply for them, as the story shows. And what they're trying to do, what the Trump people are trying to do, is filter out anyone who, kind of like Ronna McDaniel in her first interview with NBC News when being pushed about the 2020 election claims by Kristen Welker, said, when you work at the RNC, you just got to take one for the team, and I can be more myself now, which is such a swampy thing to say. They're now trying to filter out the operators for the true believers. They want people who are genuinely committed, and what they might end up getting are people who are genuinely committed to acting like they're genuinely committed, which is a real skill in Washington, D.C.
Well, in the end, what's the difference?
That's a good
point.
That's a good point.
If you're, and to me, that's more what it is.
I think there were people who did that in 2016, and they learned that those people, when the going gets tough, like an Alyssa Farah.
Yeah, so
will stab
are
you
you
in the back.
willing in your job interview to to basically like accept these preposterous things and state it publicly? Like, are you willing to kind of like debase yourself to jump through that hoop? That's the requirement for being hired back to the RNC.
They don't want Mike Pence's, like people who January 6th comes and they are not listening to what Donald Trump and John Eastman are saying should be done with the electors. Like that's what they're trying to screen out.
Yeah, and it's very, I mean, it's obviously very dissonant with what Laura Trump was trying to say in that NBC interview. Like, oh, that's in the past. Oh, really? Then why is it a central part of your hiring process? Because Trump has made this a central litmus test for the Republican Party. And the Republican base, I think, sees it as a central litmus test.
Yes.
That's why you got the slate of candidates you did in the midterm elections, which was really, you know, unfortunate for Republicans who were hoping for better results there. And obviously, it's not in the past for Donald Trump, who continues to talk about it all the time. We can put this up on the screen from Truth Social. Just recently saying, how many times is Fox News going to put on Rhino Bush apologist Mark Thiessen? He was wrong about me in 2016. 2020, I got more votes than any sitting president in history, but the election was rigged, et cetera, et cetera. This is still, you know, very standard at his rallies, in his speeches. This is not the past for him, and he's not going to let it go. He's not going to move forward. And it has implications not only in terms of this like RNC takeover and making sure that they're, you know, totally aligned with him in every single way, which, let's be honest, the party committees like, you know, under Obama or now under Biden, like obviously the DNC is fully aligned behind Joe Biden, rigged that primary for him effectively. So it's not like it's unusual to have the party apparatus totally in lockstep with whoever the current president or the current nominee is. But it also matters a lot when it comes to this question of early voting.
Yes, hugely important.
Because, and that's part of what Laura Trump was kind of like gesturing towards in that interview. You know, if Trump had just leaned into getting people to vote early and by mail, it's very possible he's president right now. But instead of casting doubt on that process, so that everybody had to show up on election day. And you guys know how life is, right? You may have every intention of voting and then you forget. Or your kid gets sick, or you got to stay late at the job, or you're just really tired, or it's raining out and you don't feel it. Like, there's a million reasons.
It's snowing in Nevada.
Yeah, there's a million reasons that can come up on election day where you're like, this isn't going to happen for me today. This just isn't in the cards.
Yeah.
So if you are banking on trying to get your supporters there on that day, you are putting yourself at a profound disadvantage. Trump has clearly been told by his political advisors that this was a problem for him. At times, he has signaled like, okay, now we got to do the mail-in balloting thing, but he also is very reluctant. And the views of this among the Republican base are also pretty baked in now, where they feel that this is susceptible to rigging. They feel like they need to wait and show up on election day. And so in every election we've had since then, the early vote comes in more heavily Democratic. The day of vote comes in more heavily Republican. That is a reversal, by the way, of previous trends prior to COVID. So they're trying to reverse that. But the fact that this election denialism and stop the steal stuff is still so central to the Republican Party and so central and important to Trump himself makes it very difficult to move beyond that orientation towards early voting.
Yeah, it's just like an incredible catch-22. If you talk about this and you tackle the issue head on, which is exactly what your voters want you to do, then you also sow distrust in the electoral process, which can hurt turnout.
Yeah.
So it's a really hard problem, and I think that's one of the things that, you know, the Democrats made Katie Porter apologize for saying that she felt her primary was
made me
rigged,
so mad.
Which it's like, clearly money does rig elections, and as much as I detest the quote stolen talk, and that's one of the interesting things about Trump's Truth Social post is that he said rigged, and he kind of started off saying stolen and has now moved to using that rigged parlance more. That takes a lot of money to push back on. You know, Molly Ball had a long report in Time magazine about all of the money that Mark Zuckerberg poured into early voting efforts, ballot curation, all of these things that party apparatuses. Democrats just realized during COVID that they can use all of these mechanisms, put a lot of money behind it in Democratic districts, and that's politics. So as much as I have an ideological disagreement with huge early voting periods, which is a totally fair debate, I think it's an interesting conversation. As much as I might not like that, it is the reality. And so that's why they want to have loyalists stacking the RNC, because they know they need to get on one page about this question, because it actually, when you have such a close match that could be within 1 point between Trump and Biden, and you have all these third-party candidates we already talked about, you need to be confident that you did absolutely everything you could in those respects, and that your voters wanted to vote because they felt like their votes were going to be counted in a place like Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, whatever. So it's a hugely difficult issue for Republicans. They're in a pickle, catch-22, whatever you want to call it, and it's not. There's really no easy answer, but I guess they've realized from a political perspective, it's better that they're on the same page.
Yeah, the proof that this is a real problem for them comes from those Georgia elections that happened right after the runoff elections for those 2 Senate seats. And typically, you know, Sagar and I, we were looking at the election day results and we're like, oh, it's going to a runoff. These are probably both going to be Republican seats, because that usually historically was the way the trend went, that Republicans would turn out Democrats in the runoff period. And I think 2 things ended up being really critical. Number one, Democrats, for once in their lives, actually had a really good message that was very clear, which was vote for us and you will get checks. That worked very effectively. But the other thing was, you had all this Stop the Steal stuff, and you had people literally going down to Georgia, ostensibly to campaign for these candidates, who were calling into question whether your vote is even going to be counted. Yeah. So yeah, if you're a voter and you're like, what? Why am I going to take time out of my life to go and vote when these people are telling me it's rigged and it's not even going to be counted? So I do think that that played into as well the fact that they lost both of those seats and therefore control of the Senate. Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.